Coming home to horror. I remember reading ages ago about a guy who was in the military. He had got back home after a tour of duty to find his wife and 2 kids dead. It turned out the mom had had a sudden heart attack or stroke or something, and the 2 kids have died of starvation or dehydration as they were too young to care for themselves. My grandfather's first family. My maternal grandfather, in the days before hot water was on tap, put a big pot on the boil before leaving for work for his wife and kids to bathe. The pot boiled over, extinguished the flame, and he returned home to find them dead of carbon dioxide poisoning. My mother was of his second marriage. The Lake Nyos disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. A new life. A woman I worked with a few years ago told me how her life had changed drastically. She went from having a decent job to becoming an alcoholic and working as a cleaner. She had planned to move to Spain with her husband and a young daughter, and had a great job lined up out there. The plan was her husband and daughter would fly over first, and she would fly over a week or two later due to finishing her old job a little later than planned. Her husband rang her on the day he arrived and said the house was lovely and the furniture had arrived by ferry. That was the last time she ever heard from him. Her husband and daughter were found dead by the authorities a few days after. She had called explaining she was concerned for their welfare, as she had had no contact with them and she was extremely worried. It was carbon monoxide poisoning. It's so scary to think how fast your life can change. Candyman. The story that inspired Candyman is pretty creepy. A woman in a Chicago apartment was murdered by some drug dealer who lived next door. How did he get into her apartment? Through a hole behind her bathroom mirror. Gordon Smiley, a young driver from Texas, died during the 1982 Indianapolis 500 qualifications as he attempted to break a record speed. He crashed into a wall head-on at 185 miles per hour or 297 kilometers per hour. The doctor on site at the time witnessed the crash and wrote about what he saw. While rushing to the car, I noticed small splotches of an unusual gray substance marking a trail on the asphalt leading up to the driver. When I reached the car, I was shocked to see that Smiley's helmet was gone along with the top of his skull. He had essentially been scalped by the debris fence. The material on the racetrack was most of his brain. His helmet, due to massive force, was literally pulled from his head on impact. I rode to the care center with his body, and on the way I performed a cursory examination and realized that nearly every bone in his body was shattered. He had a gaping wound in his side that looked as if he had been attacked by a large shark. I had never seen such trauma. There's no effective treatment for rabies once the virus takes hold. Rabies' 99.9% mortality rate is higher than any other disease on Earth. Rabies is a viral disease that causes inflammation of the brain in humans and other mammals. Rabies is spread when an infected animal bites or scratches a human or other animals. Saliva from an infected animal can also transmit rabies if the saliva comes into contact with the eyes, mouth, or nose. Early symptoms can include fever and tingling at the site of exposure. These symptoms are followed by one or more of the following symptoms: nausea, vomiting, violent movements, uncontrolled excitement, fear of water, an inability to move body parts, confusion, and loss of consciousness. Once symptoms appear, the result is virtually always death, regardless of treatment. Globally, dogs are the most common animal involved. In the Americas, bat bites are the most common source of rabies infections in humans, and less than 5% come from dogs. Thankfully, there are a number of rabies vaccines available that are both safe and effective.